Hi, everyone. We're here to present to you today, Where's Your Data? Ransomware, Protecting Your ICS Environment. I'm one of the principal adversary hunters at Dragos. My name's Kyle.
And I'm Anna. I'm the Senior Intelligence Analyst at Dragos. So just to jump right into it, ransomware is really remaining a preeminent threat to the ICS sector with attacks that can disrupt production and operations if operational technology is improperly segmented from targeted IT systems. This can also lead to, of course, financial loss and reputational damage. And when OT is running on or connected to enterprise IT, ransomware can easily interrupt operations. So Dragos has compiled data on dedicated leak sites that we have leveraged by ransomware actors to analyze trends through June, July, and August. Dedicated leak sites are leveraged by ransomware actors to post victim data and provide instructions for paying the ransom. And in many of these cases, ICS operations would not have been halted or otherwise impacted if the OT networks had not been connected to or running on enterprise IT networks. So in some cases, adversaries will also use DLS to post stolen data if the ransomware payment is not received. And of course, like as a disclaimer, appearance on a DLS site does not guarantee that a firm was successfully compromised, or the extent of access by the threat actors, or if the firm makes the ransomware payment or not. Some firms posted on dedicated leak sites may deem the extent of damage caused by ransomware actors to just be too minimal to warrant payment. One example, there was a recent attack on a wastewater treatment plant in Maine, and the threat actors compromised one machine, and the head of security for the water treatment plant just said, you know what, whatever, it had to be updated anyway, like they can have it. Occasionally, ransomware actors will also post inaccurate information on dedicated leak sites. For example, they might post the name of one firm and then the description of a completely different firm. So while dedicated leak sites are not fully accurate, they do provide unique insight into the priorities of ransomware groups, including which sectors and subsectors they most frequently target, which sectors they prioritize, and which areas of the globe are more likely to experience attacks. Additionally, of course, as more ICS firms integrate more Internet of Things devices, that also expands the attack surface that is available for ransomware attacks. So if we go into the data, we're kind of going to start very broad trends and go into more specific ICS-specific trends. Once again, this is really only looking at industrial control systems firms. So not retail, not real estate, not banks, not your mom and pop bakery. So if we look at the data that we collected through our third-party aggregator through June through August, you do see an increase in ransomware attacks, especially in August. Really interestingly, Dragos did not track any Lockbit attacks in June. It could have just been that Lockbit affiliates were busy targeting retail or other sectors and wouldn't have been noted. That data wouldn't have been noted by us because once again, we're really only tracking ICS. And then in July, there were 12 Lockbit 2.0 incidents tracked by Dragos, and then that went up to 21 in August. So just to kind of go over that trend in a little bit of a different way, in June, 50% of the attacks we tracked were perpetrated by Conti threat actors. In July, it started to change. It was only 15% Conti and 45% Lockbit. And then in August, 50% of attacks tracked were Lockbit, and then only 10% of the attacks we tracked were Conti. So if we look at ransomware, ICS ransomware by country, I mean, obviously the US really stands out. Clearly, ransomware is a global target or a global threat that's targeting all sorts of pretty much every country, every continent that you can imagine. One thing to note, a lot of ransomware operators operating out of Russia or other Russian-controlled countries won't target past Soviet Union countries. And interestingly, other countries can be very industry-specific targeting. For example, in Germany, we tracked 5 ransomware attacks targeting ICS, and they were all against manufacturing. Same thing with Taiwan. We tracked 3 attacks. They were all on technology manufacturing specifically. So if we start to look at ransomware by ICS vertical, there's clearly a big trend here with manufacturing taking up 58% of the pie. if we kind of zoom back a little bit and hypothesize why that might be the case, first of all, there are so many companies that are manufacturers. So everything, if you look around your home office or regular office or wherever you are, everything in your house was manufactured probably by some different company. It's rare that there would be multiple items that would be manufactured by the same company, whereas everybody in your neighborhood probably gets power by the same power source. So one hypothesis is there's just a lot more companies. Another hypothesis is if there's a high chance of receiving payment for the ransomware actors because of the potential supply chain impacts down the road. You could also hypothesize that maybe manufacturing is an attractive target because they do have a higher chance of getting that payment, but also a lower chance of directly impacting people's lives and livelihood. For example, attacking the energy sector, taking down power grids, or disruption, like as we saw in Colonial Pipeline, has a much bigger impact. So just for fun, I decided to also break the ransomware that we tracked down into the manufacturing subsector, and because it was such a huge chunk of the pie. So here, the big slice is the metal component slice. So metal component manufacturing is a pretty wide a category, but if IT systems are down or if OT systems are broken, then the lack of the ability to create these metal components can impact multiple OT systems that depend on them, including, for example, like oil and gas pipeline construction, oil rig construction, energy, the list goes on, all these different sectors that depend heavily on metal components. The other two big standouts, technology, manufacturing, so that would be, for example, manufacturing computer chips, and then automotive manufacturers. There are several attacks in Germany against automotive manufacturers, and then a couple spread across the rest of the world as well. So now if we go ahead and kind of zoom back even further and look at ICS ransomware by manufacturing strain specifically, once again, there's some pretty clear trends that stand out. So I'll go ahead and dive a little bit into Lockbit and then talk a little bit about Conti, the difference in their techniques, tactics, and procedures, and a few insights that I've kind of stumbled upon in my research. So for those who aren't aware, Lockbit 2.0 is a ransomware as a service program in which Lockbit 2.0 developers offer their ransomware platform, which was relaunched in June, to affiliates who can then leverage the platform to conduct ransomware attacks. Once again, if they relaunched their platform in June, that might explain why there were so few Lockbit attacks in June, and that trend just dramatically went up through August. The platform uses the double extortion model, where data is exfiltrated prior to systems being locked. If the victim then refuses to make the payment, the attackers will threaten to leak the exfiltrated data. We've all seen it, we've all heard about it. The affiliates who conducted the attack and the developers of the ransomware split any ransom payments between themselves. Typically, the model is 20 to 30% to the ransomware developers and 70 to 80% to the affiliates. Lockbit is believed to be related to the LockerGoga and MegaCortex ransomware families due to shared TTPs, particularly the ability to propagate automatically into new targets in a target environment. According to an article published on the 4th of August, Lockbit, interestingly, is actively recruiting corporate insiders to provide RDP, remote desktop protocol, and virtual private network credentials and email credentials as well to assist attackers in gaining access to networks. And then in exchange, as the corporate insider, you walk away with $1 million paycheck. Lockbit does not operate in countries that are formerly a part of the Soviet Union and leverages tools such as Steelbit, Metasploit, and Cobalt Strike. In late July, reports emerged indicating researchers had uncovered a new version of the Lockbit 2.0 ransomware platform that automates the encryption of a Windows domain using Active Directory group policies. Dragos assesses with moderate confidence that Lockbit and subsequent iterations of this ransomware group will continue to develop innovative techniques to increase the potency of their ransomware operations. So if we go ahead and pivot a little bit and look at the other big chunk of this pie graph, Conti is also a ransomware as a service platform. You may be noticing a trend in which affiliates purchase access from third-party actors who are selling for example, unsolicited, unpermissioned penetration testing against firms. Affiliates can then buy that access and then use it to deploy ransomware and employ double extortion to increase the chances that the ransom will be paid. Techniques used by Conti are not especially unique amongst ransomware strains. For example, they maintain persistence just using Cobalt Strike or PowerShell. It's not mind-blowing. However, unlike a lot of ransomware groups who focus on building the reputation that victims will receive their ransom or their files if the ransom is paid, Conti is significantly more volatile. Occasionally, they just will not return your files after victims pay the ransom, or they'll only give you part of your files. So whereas other groups are really focused on, weirdly enough, like customer satisfaction, Conti is way more volatile. In August of 2021, an alleged Conti affiliate leaked the group's playbook after apparently not receiving full payment following an attack. Researchers who viewed the playbook advised network administrators looking for Conti activity to scan for unauthorized Altera agent applications and AnyDesk persistence. So if we want to go ahead and look at some of the key trends, first of all, the wild popularity of Lockbit and ransomware as a service. Like I said, Lockbit came back with their new platform in June. And since then, we've just been seeing more and more Lockbit attacks. And I think we'll continue to see that trend continue through September and the rest of the fall, as long as Lockbit remains active. And the ransomware as a service model will also continue to propagate because the barrier to entry is so low compared to truly running and developing your own ransomware strain and then going ahead and going out and deploying it. Ransomware operations are extremely cyclical in that a ransomware operator will spring up, develop their ransomware, either go to the affiliate model or not. And then, law enforcement comes knocking, they do maybe a little bit too much, push a little bit too hard, and then they need to go underground or shut down for whatever reason. But maybe the whole group doesn't want to shut down, so then they come back and are looking at and start to form a new group, which is under a slightly different name with the same tactics, techniques, and procedures from the previous group, and we all just go around and around. Well, another thing that's been really interesting is the return of CLOP. In June, multiple CLOP members were arrested, and there was speculation that the group might shut down, even though they dumped some data shortly after. This was, it was a hopeful moment, we could say, because since then, most recently, there was an attack by CLOP against an oil and gas and energy machinery provider and developer, which is especially concerning because CLOP has shown the ability to target OT systems. May raise the hairs on the back of your neck if you're an ICS operator. And then if we look at some reflections on the frequently collected data, a lot of times the data that these ransomware operators are saying that they have is employees' social security numbers, maybe a couple of emails, employee home addresses. Off the top of your head, those things, of course, don't sound particularly dangerous. However, of course, there's always the threat that that information could be repurposed and lead to identity theft, phishing and spear phishing, et cetera. But more valuable information leaked could include, for example, confidential or proprietary schematics of OT equipment or other security practices that could fetch a really hefty price on the dark web should an attacker want to conduct an attack against that ICS firm. And so with that, I'll go ahead and pass it over to Kyle.
Thanks, Anna. Well, in the theme of tips, we want to cut a sort of baseline before we dive into some of the analysis of some of these ICS of ransomware events that we've analyzed over the course of 2021 so far. Just a baseline, really, I'm sure as threat analysts, we've used all this data all the time, but, just looking at that, where can we get data from? We either have internal telemetry. Obviously, this is your customer data you have. So whether you're a seller of, antivirus company, or you have, network data that you're using to, pivot off of and, create reports yourselves. Obviously, you have your information sharing partners, whether those organizations, whether it's just partnerships that you have in your businesses, so you can leverage those to help influence your own data. Obviously we all leverage, the open source intelligence world, right? It's a large community from whether you're pulling things from Twitter or you're using other open source reporting that's produced by, competitor companies or other vendors out there. Various levels of intelligence that could be pulled from that data itself. What else can you gather? And then obviously pivoting off of just other news stories themselves, understanding laws and regulations and things like that can help analyze, be used to analyze your data and help produce your reports. You obviously have your paid sources, whether you're paying, as a company for your intelligence reporting, your other network data, your other file data from that itself, right? All that is great data that can be used to help influence whether your product and your vendor information that you're producing. And I think one of the biggest aspects to data sources that we all, use probably daily, view different Slack groups or, from people meeting people at conferences along the way is those, individual analyst relationships, those bridges and friends that we built along the way. I know I talk to a lot of people daily that I haven't seen in quite a bit of time, but that doesn't mean that we're not bouncing ideas off each other, throwing things over the fence to each other, trying to think about that, think outside the box a little bit, and then help influence that reporting that you might be producing as well. Next slide. And then how, at Dragos, we use a diamond model to map things together. So, obviously a lot of this data maps to different ways and, in different sources and where you can get it and what you can do with it. Obviously, not all the time do you have every piece of the puzzle. We'd love to have host data and network data and full PCAP and net flow and everything we can get. Obviously, during some events and incidents, we can't get all that data. So we have to leverage what we can. And in the case studies we were doing, we're going to kind of look at network infrastructure on the, as it represents in the diamond model infrastructure side. But that's also both the adversary's infrastructure and the victim's infrastructure, right? So we're kind of looking at both of those sort of, where they are, what the events that are happening, what kind of information can we gather from the data sources that we have to kind of put together these events and try to understand what's going on. And can we build more pieces to the puzzle than what has been posted on those data leak sites? Can we verify some of that information and things like that? So there's a couple hypotheses that we can go into. Next slide. So these are just two that, we can throw together to try to understand, what type of analysis we want to do. Really the objective is to define signs of command and control and the adversary initiated exfiltration. We also want to categorize or characterize the operation's intents, right? What information can we gather from what, that adversary server is doing? What information can we gather from potentially the, OT network itself or other, ICS related networks that we can gather? So can we see how much data was exfiltrated from the adversary, right? Can we put together that data from NetFlow and network infrastructure and other information we can gather related to network infrastructure to figure out, can we categorize how much data was taken? Can we actually see that data was taken? Can we verify that, there was no data taken, right? We'll see a couple here in a couple of use cases analysis that we've done. There is two sides to that. And can we see other things associated with the adversary command and control? Now, do we see them testing things and doing things first and then coming back later and exfilling, right? So are they compromising the network one way and then, coming back days later, weeks later to take that data from the network, in these ransomware cases? Next slide. So again, just two, we're kind of diving into two use cases, kind of two different outcomes of events, right? So the first one was the Molson Coors incident. This happened earlier this year. Molson Coors is one of the biggest brewers globally in the world, right? They, producing, having operations both in the United States and Canada. So in early March, they notified the SEC of a cyber attack. It was alleged ransomware attack. Now, so digging in some of that information a little bit, there wasn't much out there about that. We didn't see anything on any data leak sites, but what can we move backwards from that and try to figure out when the event occurred and then how can we pivot across, network telemetry to figure out what was happening. So if you dig into a little bit, you have 4 days to notify the SEC here in the United States. It's called an 8K form. You have 4 days to notify the SEC of a cyber event that's it's compromised your network in some way somehow. So obviously going back in time, we can say that happened actually sometime before March 11th, right? So that's the 1 day, one way to figure out when the actual incident actually occurred from what we were reading out there publicly, what was reported, right? So digging into that a little bit further, we can see that we can figure out a better date that's there. We can also see, based on reporting, they actually said that production was shut down. It did affect, the brewing operations, productions, and shipments. So that was also outlined in that 8K form that they submitted, right? So we know it impacted the IT network. We know it impacted the OT network. And obviously here at Dragos, we care more about what the impact to the OT network was. Unfortunately, digging around and asking across all those different data sources, and even using, obviously the data link, dedicated leak sites, we weren't able to find any resources or any information regarding to the ransomware family or group. Obviously pivoting across network infrastructure and looking at, Molson Coors network based on what we can gather from open source intelligence, we didn't really see any evidence of exfil of data, through that period of time. So, beyond knowing that it impacted the OT network, it was never publicly known, at least to our analysis and findings of what ransomware family a group impacted them. And then obviously, again, no exfil of data from their network. So this shows us one of those situations, we can think a little bit and extrapolate a little bit. Did they ransomware people just get into the organization, shut down and compromise some machines? Molson was able to remediate that, stop the exfil itself, how much machines were impacted. Those things will potentially never be known, but, given what we can find out, we can able to put together that analysis that way. So next slide. One of the other bigger events that was publicly known, and a lot of this work was done by our colleague Kent, some great work here, was the JBS Foods incident. JBS Foods is one of the largest meat packing companies in the world. And right around the end of May, they had shut down a significant number of operations due to a ransomware attack. So, we were able to publicly understand what was done. Right here, we know that not only was the IT network impacted, but the OT network again was impacted based on reading the reports and other forms filed as well. But in this case, we're able to look at internet telemetry to figure out a lot of different things that occurred. So, as I mentioned earlier, sometimes adversary groups of all sorts will test connections, figure out what's going on first, and then come back later and do follow-on operations. Well, and this is one such case. Kent's analysis and his work, he was able to see that, from a sharing website, he saw a couple test connections hidden in the network in early March of the event, before the event occurred. And then later on, he was able to figure out how much data was potentially exfilled from the network. So not only, could we see the adversary ransom group come in, figure out if their connections worked, able to get access to where they want to get access from, and then pivoting from that, he was able to then use that known adversary infrastructure from the mega file sharing websites to then see how much data left the JBS Foods network because of, obviously pivoting off of the JBS Foods, figuring out their network footprint and seeing all this data. Somewhere between 40 and 60 gigabytes of data were exfilled from the network, right? So that alone allows you to build that whole full story and tell that full story just by using internet telemetry and obviously other public reporting based on that.
So we're going to wrap up by just looking at a few different ransomware mitigation strategies. Obviously, this is not all of the ones that we recommend. Our whole list is a lot longer. And for those that are Dragos Worldview customers, you can do that in the portal. The first thing, of course, is just to conduct regular architecture reviews to identify all of your assets, connections, and communications between your IT and OT networks. The damage caused by a ransomware attack against an IT network that is properly segmented is usually significantly less impactful to business operations than if the OT network is also held hostage as well. And when that OT network is held hostage, that's when you see a higher potential for threat to loss of life and other, more disastrous outcomes. Of course, disabling macros and Microsoft Office applications, just trying to, put as many controls in place as you can to protect your users should they accidentally click a Word document in an email that has a malicious macro attached. Mandating multi-factor authentication is, of course, it's such a basic thing, but it's so important for everything that you can, including remote desktop protocol. You might remember earlier I mentioned that Lockbit was evolving to look for email credentials or look for credentials for remote desktop protocol to gain access to companies through insiders. So mandating that multi-factor authentication is really important. And then, of course, enabling and testing your data loss prevention technologies is always going to be key. Like Kyle went over in the case of JBS Foods, maybe if they had better data loss prevention technologies, they could have detected that information was being exfiltrated in March 4th and March 5th before the big chunk was exfiltrated later. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and wrap there. Thank you guys so much. Hopefully everybody got something new or learned something new from our presentation. So we threw our Twitter handles in here. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Kyle and I love researching this stuff and learning more about it. And we hope you got to see some of that through our presentation. So thanks again.
Thanks, everyone.